When we think of dangerous criminals, we often picture men, but some of the most feared prisoners in the U.S. are women.
May your wife and kids get raped.
These women have committed shocking and brutal crimes that have earned them a place among the most notorious inmates in history.
This didn't happen. There's no way.
What about the people who died?
Let's take a closer look at their chilling stories.
31 days ago. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos, born on February 29, 1956 in Michigan, lived a life marked by tragedy and violence. She became infamous as a serial killer who murdered 7 men between 1989 and 1990 in Florida. Her case highlighted issues like gender, violence, and self-defense, inspiring the film Monster, 2003. Aileen's childhood was chaotic. Her parents separated before she was born, and her father, who had a history of child molestation, ended up in mental hospitals. She and her brother were sent to live with their grandparents at 4. As a teenager, Aileen dropped out of school, stayed at a home for unwed mothers, and turned to prostitution. Her troubles with the law began in 1974, with charges of drunk driving and shooting from a moving car. Over the years, she faced arrests for armed robbery, check forgery, and auto theft. By the late 1980s, she was a drifter, surviving through prostitution and robbery. Between late 1989 and late 1990, Aileen killed 7 middle-aged men, shooting them and stealing their belongings. Her first victim, Richard Mallory, was killed in 1989, followed by others like David Spears and Charles Carskadden, whose bodies were discovered in 1990. Each victim was either found shot multiple times or never located, as in Peter Siems's case. Arrested in 1991, Aileen confessed, initially claiming self-defense, saying the men attacked her. However, she later admitted to killing for money. In 1992, she was convicted of 1 murder and sentenced to death. She pleaded guilty to 3 more killings and received additional death sentences. Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002 in Florida. Her story continues to stir debates about justice, survival, and the complexities of human behavior. Susan Atkins. Susan Atkins, born on May 7, 1948 in San Gabriel, California, is remembered for her role in the infamous Tate LaBianca murders orchestrated by Charles Manson. She grew up in a troubled home with alcoholic parents, losing her mother at 15. After her father abandoned the family, Susan dropped out of high school and moved to San Francisco to support herself. In late 1967, Susan met Charles Manson and joined his family. She lives with them on their ranch, captivated by Manson's charisma. On August 8, 1969, following his orders, Susan and other family members went to the home of actress Sharon Tate and director Roman Polanski. They brutally murdered Tate, who was pregnant, along with 4 others in a horrifying spree that shocked the nation. Susan was arrested in October 1969, along with the rest of the Manson family. During the circus-like trial, the defendant's erratic behavior grabbed headlines. Susan admitted to stabbing Sharon Tate, initially claiming she felt no guilt for her actions. However, she later expressed deep remorse. On March 29, 1971, Susan was sentenced to death for her role in the murders. But in 1972, California's Supreme Court abolished the death penalty, commuting her sentence to life in prison. She spent the rest of her life behind bars, becoming California's longest-serving female inmate. In 2008, Susan was diagnosed with brain cancer. Despite her illness and multiple parole requests, she was denied release. She died on September 24, 2009, at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Susan Atkins' life is a grim reminder of how manipulation and blind loyalty can lead to devastating consequences. Her story, like those of the other Manson family members, remains a chilling chapter in American crime history. Diane Downs. Diane Downs, born on August 7, 1955, in Phoenix, Arizona, became infamous for a horrific crime in Springfield, Oregon, on May 19, 1983. That night, she shot her 3 children and then drove them to a hospital in a blood-soaked car, claiming a man had tried to carjack her and shot them. Her story quickly fell apart under investigation. Diane's children suffered devastating injuries. 7-year-old Cheryl died, 8-year-old Christy had a disabling stroke, and 3-year-old Danny was paralyzed from the waist down. Diane herself had a superficial gunshot wound to her arm. Investigators noticed her calm demeanor and inappropriate comments, raising suspicions. Her story was riddled with inconsistencies. She claimed a bushy-haired stranger attacked them during a late-night scenic drive, but forensic evidence didn't match. Witnesses saw her driving slowly to the hospital, contradicting her claim of racing to save her kids. Police also uncovered Diane's motive. She wanted to be free of her children, to continue an affair with a married man, Robert Knickerbocker, who had made it clear he didn't want kids. 9 months after the shooting, Diane was arrested. The case against her was solid, with key evidence coming from her surviving daughter, Christy, who eventually testified that Diane was the one who shot them. On June 17, 1984, Diane was convicted of murder, attempted murder, and assault. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years, with the judge ensuring she would likely never be released. In 1987, she briefly escaped but was recaptured. Diane has been denied parole repeatedly, maintaining her innocence and sticking to her original story. Diagnosed with severe personality disorders, she remains in prison, serving out her sentence for a crime that shocked the nation. Carla Faye Tucker. Carla Faye Tucker was sentenced to death for a brutal double murder in 1983. Along with her accomplice, Daniel Garrett, Tucker broke into Jerry Lynn Dean's and Deborah Thornton's apartment in Houston, Texas. While high on drugs, the two attacked the victims with a pickaxe and other tools, killing them in a gruesome way. Tucker and Garrett were quickly arrested, and both were sentenced to death. During her time in prison, Tucker had a significant religious transformation. She became a devout Christian, and her story of redemption gained attention from the media and spiritual leaders, including Pat Robertson. Many people, including some government officials, called for her sentence to be changed to life in prison, arguing that she had truly changed. Despite this, Texas Governor George W. Bush, who had his own religious beliefs, refused to stop the execution. On February 3, 1998, at 38 years old, Carla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection. She became the first woman to be executed in the United States since 1984, and the first in Texas in over a century. Her case sparked widespread debate about the death penalty, particularly about whether her past redemption and change should have been considered. The case also raised concerns about the fairness of the death penalty process. Texas has executed more people than any other state, and there are many instances where innocent people may have been sentenced to death. Some argue that the appeal process is flawed, with not enough attention given to new evidence or proper legal representation, which can lead to wrongful executions. Carla Faye Tucker's execution remains a powerful example of the controversy surrounding the death penalty in Texas. Judith Ann Neely. Judith Ann Neely, who was convicted of kidnapping and murdering 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken in 1982, has been denied parole again after spending over 40 years in prison. Neely, along with her husband Alvin, abducted Lisa from a mall in Georgia and took her to a motel in Alabama where they brutally attacked her. While Alvin was away with their children, Judith injected Lisa with drain cleaner multiple times. When that didn't kill her, Neely shot the young girl and dumped her body in a canyon. In a parole hearing on Thursday, Neely, now 59, was not allowed to attend. The board heard from 8 people, including Lisa's family members and the former district attorney who had prosecuted Neely. They all spoke strongly against her release. Lisa's sister, Tina Milliken, expressed her frustration saying, "She killed a child. Why keep going through this?" The former district attorney called Neely evil and depraved, adding that she killed for simple sport. Neely's crime was part of a violent spree with her husband, Alvin, who died in prison in 2005. Judith has been denied parole before, with the first hearing in 2018. Each time the board has decided that she should remain in prison. The recent hearing lasted just 23 minutes, and after a brief deliberation, the parole board unanimously denied her release. Judith Neely will continue to serve her life sentence at Julia Tutwiler Prison, and she will be eligible for another parole hearing in 2028. Her case highlights the long-lasting impact of violent crimes on victims' families, who continue to fight for justice even decades later. Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias was convicted of the brutal murder of her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander, in 2008. On June 4th of that year, Travis was found dead in his Mesa, Arizona home. He had been stabbed 27 times, had his throat slit, and was shot in the head. Arias initially claimed she was not at the scene, but later admitted to being there. She said that they had sex, took photos in the shower, and were attacked by masked intruders. Authorities didn't believe her story, especially when the evidence, like bloody handprints and a camera with photos from the day of the murder, pointed to her involvement. During the investigation, it was revealed that Arias had a missing .45 caliber gun and fingerprints linking her to the crime scene. She eventually confessed to stabbing Travis, slitting his throat, and shooting him, but claimed she acted in self-defense after he attacked her. However, her constantly changing story made her version of events hard to believe. In 2013, Arias was convicted of first-degree murder. The jury could not decide on the death penalty, leading to a mistrial. A second jury also could not agree, so she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2015. Despite initially saying she would prefer to die quickly, Arias later said she preferred serving a life sentence over facing execution. Arias is serving her sentence at Perryville Prison in Goodyear, Arizona, where she works as a library aide. She also faces an additional financial burden, having been ordered to pay $32,000 to Travis Alexander's family to cover trial-related expenses. Amy Bishop. Amy Bishop, a Harvard-trained biology professor, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after pleading guilty to killing 3 colleagues and injuring 3 others during a shooting at a faculty meeting in February 2010. The shooting took place at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where Bishop was upset over being denied tenure. She pulled out a gun from her purse and began firing, killing her department chair, Gopi Padilla, along with Professors Maria Ragland Davis and Adriel Johnson. Professors Joseph Leahy, Luis Cruz Vera, and staff aide Stephanie Monticholo were wounded. Bishop's trial was brief, with the jury deliberating for only 20 minutes before finding her guilty. She showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Defense attorneys argued that she had severe mental illness and psychotic episodes, which they claimed affected her memory of the shooting. Bishop expressed deep remorse, and her attorney said the events shattered her. Bishop's plea deal spared her from the death penalty, as some victims' families oppose capital punishment. The court decided on a life sentence without parole. She was also linked to the 1986 shooting death of her teenage brother in Massachusetts, which had initially been ruled accidental. Authorities are waiting for the Alabama case to conclude before proceeding with charges. In court, family members of the victims spoke about the impact of the crime. Dr. Jacqueline Johnson, whose husband was killed, said the loss was something she would never fully heal from. Dr. Joseph Leahy, who survived being shot, expressed that he was not seeking the death penalty, but instead focusing on being a better person. Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates, a woman from Texas, was convicted for the tragic drowning deaths of her 5 children in 2001. Struggling with severe postpartum depression, psychosis, and schizophrenia, Yates believed she had to kill her children to save them from Satan. She called her children to the bathroom one at a time and drowned them in the bathtub. The crime shocked the nation and raised questions about mental illness and the justice system. During her trial, Yates' defense argued that she had a mental illness and should receive treatment rather than prison time. Experts testified that she had suffered from untreated mental health issues, including postpartum depression, and had attempted suicide before the murders. Despite this, the jury found her guilty of capital murder for killing her 6-month-old daughter, Mary, and her 2 sons, Noah and John. The jury debated whether she should face the death penalty, but ultimately chose to spare her life, sentencing her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Yates's family, including her husband Russell, supported her mental illness defense, claiming that her psychosis led her to commit the crime. They expressed that Yates should not be treated as a criminal, but as someone who needed medical care. However, prosecutors argued that Yates knew what she was doing, as she called the police after the murders and confessed to the crime. While some supported Yates' case, pointing to the need for a better understanding of postpartum depression, others, including the prosecutor, emphasized the tragic loss of 5 young lives. Yates is currently serving her sentence and is eligible for parole in 40 years. The case continues to highlight the challenges of handling mental illness in the criminal justice system. Velma Barfield. Margie Velma Barfield was born in South Carolina on October 23, 1932, into a large, strict family. She had a difficult childhood, facing abuse from her father and struggling with her issues. At 17, Velma married Thomas Burke, and they had 2 children. Their life seemed normal until Thomas had a serious car accident in 1965, which led to him using alcohol and drugs to cope with his pain. In 1969, their home mysteriously caught fire, killing Thomas. Soon after, another fire destroyed the house. In 1970, Velma remarried Jennings Barfield, but he died of heart failure just months later. After moving in with her parents, Velma's mother became seriously ill and died unexpectedly in 1974. In 1975, Velma was jailed for writing bad checks. She later worked as a home health nurse, caring for older adults, but tragedy struck again. Montgomery Edwards and his wife Dolly both died in 1977 under strange circumstances, followed by John Henry Lee, who also died of a mysterious illness. Velma's next boyfriend, Stuart Taylor, also fell ill and died after Velma poisoned him with arsenic. It was then that her sister alerted the police, and Velma confessed to poisoning several people, including her mother, the Edwards couple, and Stuart. She claimed she poisoned them to cover up money she had stolen from them to fund her drug habit. In 1978, Velma was convicted of murdering Stuart Taylor and sentenced to death. While on death row, she became a born-again Christian and received support from many, including evangelist Billy Graham. Despite her appeals, she was executed on November 2, 1984, becoming the first woman executed by lethal injection in the U.S. Velma Barfield's last meal was a bag of Cheetos and 2 bottles of Coke. Pamela Smart. Pamela Ann Smart, born on August 16, 1967, was a 22-year-old high school media coordinator in Derry, New Hampshire, when she became involved in a deadly plot. She had an affair with 15-year-old William Billy Flynn, a student at the school, and conspired with him and 3 of his friends to murder her husband Gregory Smart in 1990. Flynn fatally shot Gregory, and Pamela was arrested and convicted of being an accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy, and witness tampering. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In 2023, after spending over 30 years behind bars, Pamela Smart accepted full responsibility for her husband's death in a public statement. She explained that, through a writing group, she had finally faced the painful truth of her involvement. "I had to acknowledge how responsible I was," she said, admitting that she had previously deflected blame as a coping mechanism. Despite this confession, some people, like Gregory's cousin, felt she didn't take full responsibility for all aspects of the crime, pointing out that she never mentioned her husband's name in the statement. Pamela's request for a sentence reduction has been denied multiple times. She served her sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York, earning several degrees, becoming a minister, and helping other inmates. Pamela has shown remorse, saying she was initially blind to her role in the crime, but now recognizes she is to blame for Gregory's death. Her lawyer has argued for her release, citing her rehabilitation. Although her petition for a sentence reduction was rejected, she continues to seek a second chance to prove she has changed. Casey Anthony. The case of Casey Anthony and her daughter Kaylee captivated the nation after 2-year-old Kaylee was reported missing in July 2008. On July 15th, Casey's mother, Cindy, called the police, saying Kaylee had been missing for a month. Casey, 22, claimed a babysitter had taken her daughter, but police soon uncovered disturbing evidence, including internet searches for chloroform and traces of human decomposition in Casey's car. In October 2008, Casey was charged with first-degree murder, and in December, Kaylee's body was found near the family's home. In 2011, Casey's murder trial began. Her defense team claimed Kaylee accidentally drowned in the family pool and that Casey's father, George, helped cover it up. The prosecution pointed to Casey's lies and suspicious behavior, including searches for chloroform. Despite the evidence, on July 5, 2011, Casey was acquitted of murder but convicted of lying to the police. She was sentenced to 4 years and released 10 days later due to time served. After her release, Casey kept a low profile until 2017, when she gave interviews asserting that she didn't know what happened to Kaylee. In 2019, her father George said he was ready to forgive her, though their relationship remained strained. In 2022, Casey spoke out again in a docuseries, accusing her father of causing Kaylee's death and covering it up. George denied the allegations, leaving the family divided. In January 2024, George and Cindy took lie detector tests in a reality show about the case. Cindy believes Casey knows what happened to Kaylee, but has never confessed. The tragedy has left the Anthony family broken, with Casey's inconsistent statements and accusations only adding to the pain. Griselda Blanco. On January 25th, Netflix released Griselda, a 6-episode series starring Sofia Vergara as Griselda Blanco, a notorious drug trafficker from the 1970s and 80s. Blanco, known as the Queen of Cocaine and Godmother of Cocaine, built a vast drug empire, primarily in Miami, and was responsible for countless murders, including those of her husbands. She became famous for her ruthless methods of trafficking cocaine and using violence to maintain control over her operations. Blanco's criminal career began in Colombia, but by the late 1970s, she was running a massive drug operation in Miami. At her peak, she was smuggling up to 3,400 pounds of cocaine every month. To keep power, Blanco didn't hesitate to kill people, whether for money, revenge, or disrespect. She also perfected the method of drive-by shootings on motorcycles, making it easier for hitmen to escape. Blanco was responsible for many murders in South Florida, and even a tragic 1982 incident where a 2-year-old was killed by accident. Despite being one of the most wanted criminals in the United States, Blanco evaded capture for years. But in 1985, she was arrested in California and brought to trial. She was convicted of drug trafficking and sentenced to 15 years in prison. While behind bars, she allegedly planned to kidnap John F. Kennedy Jr. to secure her release. Blanco later faced murder charges, but a key witness's scandalous actions led to a plea deal. In 1998, she pled guilty to 3 second-degree murders and was released in 2004. She was deported to Colombia, where she was killed in 2012 at age 69. Sarah Pender. Sarah Jo Pender became widely known after escaping from a correctional facility in 2008. She had been convicted, along with her boyfriend, Richard Hull, of the 2,000 murders of their roommates, Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman, in Indiana. Sarah, then 21, worked as a secretary, while Richard had a criminal past. Tensions between the two roommates had been growing, especially over a drug deal. Richard couldn't legally buy a gun, so Sarah helped him purchase a shotgun. On October 24, 2000, after a heated argument, Richard shot both victims, one in the chest and the other in the head. Afterward, Sarah helped him dispose of the bodies, which were dumped in a dumpster. In the following days, Sarah went about her life, going to work as usual while Richard tried to cover up the crime. The couple was eventually caught, and though Sarah wasn't directly linked to the murders, she was charged because she helped Richard afterward. A letter that Sarah allegedly sent to Richard was used in the trial, where she seemed to take responsibility for the crime, although her lawyer argued it was a forgery. In 2003, Richard Hull pled guilty to the murders and was sentenced to 75 years. Sarah, however, continued to maintain that she was not involved in the actual killings. In 2008, Sarah escaped from Rockville Correctional Facility with the help of 2 accomplices. She was recaptured later that year in Chicago. In 2009, a book about the case revealed that key evidence had been missed during Sarah's trial. In 2012, the prosecutor who had convicted her became convinced that Sarah was wrongfully sentenced and offered to help her get a fair trial. Michelle Blair. Mitchell Blair, a mother from Detroit, shocked the world when she admitted to killing 2 of her children, 13-year-old Stoney Blair and 9-year-old Stephen Barry, and hiding their bodies in her freezer. In a jail interview, Blair showed no remorse, saying she would do it again if she had to, claiming her children had abused her younger child, though she never witnessed the abuse herself. Blair was sentenced to life in prison in July after pleading guilty to the murders. She remained emotionless throughout the trial, and even told the court, "I don't feel no remorse for the death of them demons." She confessed to severely abusing her daughter, Stoney, causing her death by punching, suffocating, and hitting her with a blunt object. As for her son, Stephen, Blair admitted to burning him with scalding water and causing him severe injuries, which led to his death. The crimes came to light in March 2015 when an eviction crew discovered the children's bodies hidden in the freezer at Blair's home. She was sentenced to life without parole in just 4 months. Blair claimed that her children had sexually abused a sibling, but there was no evidence to support her claims. In court, Judge Dana Hathaway condemned Blair for failing to protect her children, emphasizing that she had created a house of horrors. Blair, however, remained unapologetic, referring to her children as demons. While Blair had a troubled past, including childhood abuse, it didn't excuse her actions. 2 of Blair's surviving children were placed with relatives, and the community expressed shock over the horrific crimes that occurred behind closed doors. Shayna Hubers. Shayna Hubers was sentenced to life in prison for the 2012 murder of her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. The judge, Daniel Zala, agreed with the jury's recommendation stating that Huber's actions were calculated and violent. Huber's 27 showed no emotion during her sentencing, eligible for parole in 14 years after serving 6 years. The crime happened on October 12, 2012, at Ryan Poston's condo in Highland Heights. Huber's claimed she shot him in self-defense, saying he was abusive and pressured her into sex acts. However, prosecutors presented evidence through text messages showing no abuse, and the jury found Huber's guilty of murder after a 2-week trial. Her first trial was thrown out because of a juror's felony conviction, but she was retried and convicted. At sentencing, Huber's defense team argued that she had borderline personality disorder and was unlikely to commit more crimes if paroled. They also pointed out that Huber's took responsibility by calling 911 after the shooting. However, the prosecutor, Michelle Snodgrass, criticized Huber's for showing no remorse, noting she never apologized to Poston's family and made dismissive comments about them after the trial. While in prison, Huber's confessed to her cellmates about her actions. One inmate, Holly Nivens, said Huber's believed she deserved what she wanted and she didn't want to be judged. Despite claiming self-defense, Huber's lack of remorse and the evidence presented against her led to her life sentence. Now, she waits for the possibility of parole in 14 years, but her story remains one of a violent and tragic relationship. The women we've discussed are some of the most feared and dangerous criminals in the United States, leaving a trail of terror behind them. Their stories remind us of the dark side of human nature and the consequences of their actions. It's a chilling reminder that not all criminals fit the usual stereotype, and some are capable of the most horrifying acts.